I will not drink the orange juice tonight either. I have not touched it in 3 days, and tonight, sitting alone in a Marriott room 12 miles from the house I built with my own hands, that single fact is the only thing keeping me sane. My wife filed for guardianship over me, claiming my mind was gone, and at the final hearing, my granddaughter stood up in front of the judge and asked, "Can I please show everyone the video Grandpa doesn't know about?" The judge lowered his gavel and nodded. When that video started playing on the courtroom screens, the entire room went dead silent. Before I tell you how we got there, let me know where you're listening from tonight, friend. And if you've ever had someone you trusted try to convince you that you were the broken one, hit that like button for me. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 68 years old, and for 41 years, I ran a fleet of long-haul trucking companies out of a gravel lot in Tulsa, Oklahoma, until it became the third largest independent freight operation in the Midwest. I built that business out of a single rusted-out Peterbilt and a $100 loan from my late father. I have shaken hands with senators. I have negotiated fuel contracts that saved companies from bankruptcy. And 3 weeks ago, I sat in a windowless conference room while my own wife's lawyer held up a folder of medical records and told a judge that I was no longer fit to manage my own affairs. My hands were shaking on the table that day. I remember staring down at them like they belonged to a stranger, watching the tremor ripple through my fingers no matter how hard I pressed them flat against the wood. Across from me sat Renee. She is 52 years old, and she has been my wife for 14 years. She wore a gray cardigan I had never seen before. No jewelry, her hair pulled back tight, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she never actually needed. Beside her sat her son from her first marriage, Cole, 31 years old, dressed in a suit that fit him a little too well for a man who, as far as I knew, worked an ordinary job managing inventory at one of my own logistics yards. Renee's attorney stood and told the court that I had been suffering memory lapses for 6 months, that I had grown violent, paranoid, prone to screaming fits that terrified the household staff, that I had, on 3 separate occasions, wandered out of the house in the middle of the night and been found disoriented in the driveway. He held up a manila folder thick with what he called clinical evaluations and read from it like scripture. He said the word dementia 4 times in 11 minutes. Each time he said it, something inside my chest folded a little further in on itself. Because here is the terrible secret nobody tells you about being accused of losing your mind. A part of you starts to wonder if they're right. I had not always doubted myself. I built an empire on instinct, sharper than any spreadsheet. But 6 months ago, the fog started rolling in. I stood at a board meeting trying to introduce a logistics partner I had known for 15 years, and his name simply disappeared from my head, gone, like someone had reached into my skull and erased it. My nephew Cole, because Renee had always called him my nephew around the family, a strange habit I'd never questioned, had to step in and smooth it over. Then came the temper. I threw a coffee mug at a dispatcher over a scheduling error 2 months ago, something I had never done in 4 decades of running crews twice as rough as me. I remembered the look on the boy's face. I remembered Renee's hand on my shoulder afterward, her voice trembling as she told me I'd broken a lamp in the den the night before and didn't even remember doing it. The dizziness came at night, mostly. A heavy, syrupy fog that would settle behind my eyes around 11 o'clock and not lift until almost noon the next day. I would wake up with my mouth tasting like pennies, my balance unsteady, certain words slipping out of reach when I reached for them. If my mind was really going, I told myself, then maybe Renee and Cole really were just trying to protect me. Maybe I deserved this hotel room with its beige walls and its smell of industrial carpet cleaner. The thought of becoming a danger to my granddaughter, Josie, who was 10 years old and the only light I had left in this world, made my stomach turn over completely. That first night in the hotel, the phone on the nightstand rang at 9:15. I let it ring twice before I picked it up, my hand trembling so badly I nearly dropped the receiver. "Walter, honey." It was Renee, and her voice was not the cold, clinical voice from the courtroom. It was soft, the voice I had fallen in love with at a freight conference in Dallas 14 years ago. "I am so sorry it had to come to this. Did you eat something? Are you resting?" "You had my bags packed before I even got home, Renee," I said. "Garbage bags, on the porch, like I was trash." She made a small, wounded sound on the other end of the line, the kind of sound that used to break my heart instantly. "You don't remember what happened that morning, do you?" she whispered. "You grabbed Josie by the wrist, Walter. You scared her so badly she cried for an hour. I can't have that in my house. I won't risk her safety. Not even for you. I had no memory of that. None. But the broken lamp in the den had been real too, hadn't it? The mug I'd thrown had been real. Maybe this was real as well. Some dark thing living inside me that surfaced only when I wasn't looking. I love you, she said, and her voice cracked perfectly on the last word. The way a voice cracks when it has practiced cracking. Cole is going to bring over some papers tomorrow. Temporary guardianship, just so we can keep paying for your care while you get evaluated properly. It's only a formality, sweetheart. Sign it for Josie. Sign it for us. I hung up the phone and walked to the mirror above the hotel dresser. The man looking back at me had gray skin and hollow eyes and trembling hands, and for one long, terrible moment, I believed every single thing they had told me about him. Cole showed up the next morning in a navy suit, carrying a leather portfolio under his arm, his face arranged into a mask of careful, rehearsed sorrow. Uncle Walter? He said he had never once in 14 years called me Dad, always Uncle, even though Renee insisted on the family fiction that he was simply her nephew, rather than admitting the boy was 23 when she married me, and had been living off my generosity ever since. You look wiped out. Mom's worried sick. He spread papers across the small glass table in the corner of the room. My eyes swam, trying to focus on the print, the black letters crawling like ants across the white page. He told me it was nothing, just routine authorizations, payroll signatures the bank required from the founding partner, quarterly vendor renewals. He slid a heavy pen toward me and told me not to strain myself reading the fine print, that he would handle everything, that all I needed to do was sign where the yellow tabs were. My fingers shook so badly the pen clattered against the glass twice before I managed to grip it. As I stared down at my own trembling hand, a memory surged up out of nowhere, sharp as a blade. I was 26 years old again, standing in a frozen Tulsa lot at 4 in the morning, changing a blown tire on my one and only truck with bare, bleeding hands because I couldn't afford gloves yet. That man's hands never shook. That man built an empire out of grit and stubbornness. And now I couldn't even hold a pen steady enough to sign my own name. Cole leaned over my shoulder to point at the first signature line, and as he reached across the table, his suit sleeve rode up his wrist. I stopped breathing. Wrapped around his wrist was a watch I recognized instantly, a limited edition Audemars Piguet, the kind with a steel and rose gold case that retailed somewhere north of $90,000. I had priced one myself 2 years ago as a possible gift for a major client and walked away from it. Cole made $51,000 a year managing inventory at my Broken Arrow yard. There was no version of his salary, no bonus structure on earth, that put a $90,000 watch on that boy's wrist on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The fog in my head didn't lift all at once. It cracked, the way ice cracks across a frozen pond, one long fissure splitting outward from a single point of pressure. I did not pull my hand back. I did not look up at his face. I let my fingers keep shaking, and I signed every page he put in front of me, sloppy and trembling, exactly the way a dying man would sign them. I played the part he needed me to play. When he finally gathered the papers and walked out, I heard him whistling cheerfully down the hallway, a man who believed he had just gotten away with something. 2 days later, the court granted a single hour of supervised visitation at Riverside Park. I sat on a bench in the cold for 45 minutes before the black SUV pulled up. Josie climbed out wearing the yellow raincoat I had bought her for her birthday, her shoulders hunched, her eyes on the ground. A court-appointed monitor walked beside her, and Renee trailed 2 steps behind, arms crossed, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, watching every single movement between us like a hawk circling a field mouse. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down on the wet grass. "I missed you so much." She didn't run to me the way she always had. She stood 3 feet away, picking at the hem of her sleeve, glancing nervously back at her grandmother before whispering, "Hi, Grandpa." This was a child who used to fall asleep in my office chair waiting for me to finish reviewing dispatch routes, who narrated entire imaginary kingdoms to me over breakfast. Now she looked like she was afraid of saying the wrong word in front of the wrong person. We talked in single syllables for most of the hour. When the monitor finally announced that time was up, I stood and told Josie I would see her soon, that I would never stop fighting for her, and something in those words finally broke through whatever fear had been holding her in place. She ran the last few feet and threw her arms around my waist. I dropped to my knees and held her, breathing in the smell of her shampoo and in that single shielded second while my body blocked her from her grandmother's view, I felt her small hand slide into the pocket of my coat and press something deep into the fabric. "That's enough." Renee's voice cut across the park like a blade. She crossed the grass fast, heels sinking into the wet ground, and pulled Josie away by the wrist before I could say another word. The SUV doors slammed, the engine roared. They were gone, and I was left kneeling alone on the cold grass with my hand hovering over my pocket, feeling the faint outline of something small and folded pressing against my ribs. I didn't dare open it there. I walked briskly to the public restroom near the playground, locked myself into the last stall, and pulled out a tiny scrap of notebook paper, torn raggedly from a spiral binder. In Josie's careful, frightened 10-year-old handwriting, 6 words were pressed hard enough into the page to nearly tear through it. "Grandpa, don't drink the green smoothie." I stood in that restroom for a long time, staring at those 6 words until the fluorescent light burned them permanently into my eyes. For 6 months, every single night before bed, Renee had brought me a glass of homemade kale and ginger smoothie, insisting it was for my cholesterol, blending it herself in the kitchen, refusing to let the housekeeper touch it, standing in the doorway watching until I drank every drop. I had never once questioned why my devoted wife was suddenly so invested in my evening nutrition after 14 years of indifference toward my diet. I traced the timeline backward right there against the cold tile wall. 6 months ago, almost to the week, was when the smoothies started. 6 months ago was when the fog began. The brain fog never struck in the afternoon, only at night, hours after I drank that glass. The memory lapses always clustered around midnight and the early morning hours, just like the tremors. I had not had a single drop of that smoothie in 3 days, ever since they locked me out, and I held my bare hands up in the harsh restroom light and watched them. Steady. Not a single tremor. Not one. The relief that flooded through me was almost immediately overtaken by a rage so cold it felt like ice water replacing the blood in my veins. I was not losing my mind. I had been poisoned, slowly and deliberately, by the woman who shared my bed. While a boy I had given a career to wore a $100,000 watch he could never have afforded honestly. They had locked me out before finishing the job, and in doing so, they had handed me the one thing I needed most, 3 days without the poison, and 3 days to think clearly. I folded Josie's note into my breast pocket, right against my heart, and walked back out into the gray afternoon with my spine straighter than it had been in months. That night, alone in the hotel room with the lights off, I waited until the digital clock read 2 in the morning before opening my laptop. 30 years ago, when I'd first computerized the dispatch systems for Briggs Freight, I had quietly kept myself a backdoor login that no IT consultant since had ever found or removed, a habit born from a lifetime of trusting no one completely. Not even family, not even after everything. I typed in a sequence of credentials Cole had no idea existed and slipped silently into the company's financial servers. What I found made my stomach drop straight through the floor. Cole had been authorizing wire transfers for months, routed through 3 shell consulting firms registered in Delaware: Ironclad Freight Solutions, Meridian Logistics Partners, Westbrook Transport Advisory, none of which existed as actual operating businesses. $2.3 million had moved through Ironclad alone. Another $1.5 million through Meridian. The routine vendor authorizations he'd had me sign with shaking hands in that hotel room weren't payroll forms at all. They were the final piece of an elaborate embezzlement scheme, and every single fraudulent signature on those wire authorizations was mine. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was building a paper trail that would lead investigators directly back to a man already documented, on the record, as suffering from dementia. When the company collapsed under the weight of the missing millions, Cole would hand over the ledgers with tears in his eyes and explain that his poor uncle's mind had simply broken and nobody would ever look twice at him. I sat back in that hotel chair with my pulse hammering and felt the old instinct rise up in me, the same gut feeling that had told me which freight contracts to walk away from and which clients would default before they ever missed a payment. I wanted to call the police that instant. I wanted to drive to that house and drag both of them out onto the lawn myself. But 41 years of negotiating with men far more dangerous than Cole had taught me that the first move in a trap is patience. I spent the next 11 days building my case like I was structuring the biggest acquisition of my career. I hired a private toxicologist, a quiet, careful man named Dr. Holloway, who confirmed through hair strand analysis that I had been ingesting therapeutic doses of a sedative called zolpidem for at least 5 months, enough to cause exactly the tremors, the memory gaps, and the disorientation that Renee's lawyer had presented to the court as dementia. I hired forensic accountants who traced every dollar through Ironclad and Meridian and Westbrook back to personal accounts held jointly by Cole and Renee. I retained an attorney named Patricia Solano, sharp as a blade and twice as patient, who quietly assembled it all into a case file thick enough to end careers and end marriages and end, quite possibly, both of their freedom. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that Josie had her own plan running in parallel with mine. The final hearing was set for a Tuesday morning at the Tulsa County Courthouse, 3 weeks after I'd first sat shaking at that table. Renee's attorney, a polished man named Garrett Vance, stood at his podium and delivered an opening that nearly moved the gallery to tears, praising my 4 decades of business brilliance, before pivoting into a devastating account of my cognitive collapse. He submitted a folder of forged psychiatric evaluations. He called Cole to the stand, and my nephew sat in that witness box and wept, actual tears rolling down his face, describing fictional nighttime episodes where I had wandered the property screaming, where I had supposedly struck a member of the household staff, where I had forgotten my own granddaughter's name. He begged the judge, voice trembling with manufactured grief, to grant his mother full guardianship so they could get me the help I desperately need. I sat perfectly still through every word of it, my hands flat on the table, watching him dig his own grave with a golden shovel and saying nothing, because I knew what was sitting in Patricia's briefcase 3 feet behind me. I knew the toxicology report was real and certified. I knew the wire transfer records were airtight. I knew the Federal Financial Crimes Unit had already frozen $600,000 in an offshore account Cole thought no one would ever find. I let him talk. The judge, a tired man named Judge Reinhold with 30 years on the bench, listened to the entire performance with deepening sorrow in his eyes. When Vance finally rested and the judge reached for his gavel, his expression carried the particular, crushing pity reserved for a man the room had decided was already broken. He drew a breath, gathered the conservatorship papers, and lifted the gavel an inch off its base. That was the exact moment a small voice rang out from the back of the gallery. "Wait, please wait." Every head in that courtroom turned at once. Standing in the center aisle, clutching a battered pink tablet against her chest, was Josie. Beside her stood a courthouse advocate Patricia had quietly arranged weeks earlier, the woman's hand resting protectively on Josie's shoulder. Renee shot up out of her chair so fast it nearly toppled backward, her composed, grieving wife mask shattering into raw, naked panic. "Can I please show everyone the video Grandpa doesn't know about?" Josie asked, her voice shaking but carrying clearly across the silent room. Renee lunged across the aisle, screaming for someone to stop her, but the bailiff caught her by the shoulder before she made it 2 steps and steered her firmly back into her chair. Judge Reinhold's expression shifted in an instant, the pity draining out of his face, replaced by something sharper, more alert. He leaned forward and looked at my granddaughter with surprising gentleness. "You may approach, young lady," he said. "Bailiff, please help her with the equipment." I sat frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs, because in 11 days of building the most airtight case of my life, I had never once known what was on that tablet. Josie walked past me and offered me a small, brave smile before the bailiff connected the cables and 4 monitors along the courtroom wall flickered to life. The footage was grainy, but unmistakable. It had been captured from a small camera tucked inside a stuffed elephant Josie kept on the kitchen counter at our house, a gift I had given her years earlier that she still, for reasons I never questioned, refused to part with. The timestamp in the corner read 3 months prior. The courtroom watched in dead silence as Renee walked into frame wearing her bathrobe, reached behind a row of vitamin bottles in the cabinet, and pulled out a small, unmarked amber bottle. She crushed several white pills with the back of a spoon, swept the powder into a blender pitcher, and poured in kale and ginger and ice, the green smoothie I had trusted every single night for 6 months. Before she could finish, the kitchen door opened, and Cole walked in. He crossed the kitchen, wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, and kissed her, long and unhurried, while the blender still hummed on the counter. A horrified gasp rippled through the gallery. Renee turned in his arms, smiling, and Cole reached past her to dip his finger along the rim of the blender pitcher, tasting it, grimacing slightly, and laughing. "Once his brain's gone for good," he said, clear as a bell on the recording, "the company's basically ours." The screens went black. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that seems to physically press against your eardrums. I turned my head and looked across the aisle. Renee's face had gone the color of ash. Cole sat frozen in the witness box, his mouth hanging open, the confident, weeping performer from 20 minutes earlier completely gone, replaced by a man watching his entire life collapse in real time. I stood up slowly. My hands, I noticed, were not shaking at all. I nodded once to Patricia, and she rose, opened her briefcase, and laid the toxicology report and the financial records on the judge's bench with a thud that seemed to echo off the high ceiling. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting clean through the chaos rising in the gallery, "my client is not suffering from dementia. He has been the victim of deliberate, sustained chemical poisoning and a coordinated scheme to defraud him of his company." Before Vance could even rise to object, the courtroom doors swung open and two agents from the Financial Crimes Division walked in, badges raised. Patricia, having handed over the evidence 3 days earlier exactly as planned, Cole bolted for the side exit and made it 4 steps before the bailiff brought him down hard onto the marble floor. Renee collapsed back into her chair, sobbing, calling my name, reaching for that same soft, pleading tone she had used on the phone in my hotel room weeks earlier. I did not look at her. I had nothing left to give her. Judge Reinhold brought the gavel down hard, revoked every temporary order Renee had been granted, awarded me full and immediate custody of Josie, and signed federal arrest warrants for both of them without a moment's hesitation. I watched the cuffs close around Renee's wrists. I watched Cole, the boy I had given a job and a career and 14 years of unearned trust, dragged out of that courtroom in tears, facing decades for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted poisoning. When the room finally cleared, I walked over to where Josie stood by the witness box and dropped to my knees in front of her, pulling her into my arms. She cried into my shoulder, and I held her there for a long time, this brave little girl who had been watching far more closely than any of us realized, who had risked everything to slip a note into my pocket and then risked everything again to walk into a federal courtroom and ask a judge for permission to speak. I lost a wife I had loved and a nephew I had mentored. Both of them traded away to greed I never saw coming. But I kept my company, I kept my health, and I kept the only person in that entire courtroom who never once doubted who I really was. Here's what 14 years and 11 days taught me, friends. Betrayal rarely wears the face of a stranger. It sits across the dinner table from you. It calls you sweetheart on the phone while it's planning your downfall. The moment someone starts insisting you can't trust your own mind, your own memory, your own instincts, that is the exact moment you need to start trusting them the most. Keep a hand on your own affairs no matter how much you love the people around you. And listen closely to the quiet ones in the room, because sometimes the smallest person in your family is paying closer attention than anyone twice her size. If this story kept you with me tonight, hit that subscribe button and tell me down in the comments, has anyone in your own family ever underestimated you? I want to hear about it. I'll see you in the next one. Sometimes the people who love us most aren't the ones with the loudest words, but the ones quietly watching, ready to catch us when no one else notices we're falling. Trust your gut. Hold on to your own truth even when the whole room doubts you. And never underestimate the small, steady heart standing beside you. Family isn't about who shares your blood, it's about who shows up when it matters most. A small note for you. This story was crafted and fictionalized by AI purely for entertainment, while hoping to leave you with a warm and meaningful life lesson.